throughout the discussion. And so really, this is an opportunity for me to first kind of brief everyone on what we've been doing, what we've been working on, the community additions or whatever you call them of our product. And we've been pretty aggressive in like releasing more and more stuff. And so the whole point of this is really to hop in and help people understand first what we do, how things work. Certainly when you're talking about a community product and launching as quick as we have, there's certain areas that we're prioritizing and focusing on. And we want to share that with the community, and then how we envision you consume the product and or how people are consuming the different services today. So yes, thank you all for joining. It looks like we have a decent amount of people here, and throughout the discussion, if you want to talk, just hop in. Actually, someone raised their hand. I'm not sure who that was, but everyone should have talking capabilities if you unmute and want to talk as well. So don't hesitate. During the discussion, I'm going to try and have pauses for feedback sessions on some of the different community offerings, since we have multiple of them, and try and help people understand, where our focus is, what we've been working on, and then what we're delivering within the VulnCheck community. So that's going to be primarily the focus. As I get into some of things like threat intelligence and KEV, I'm going to hop into some analysis that I've done as well that might provide some visibility into what's under the hood. In addition to comments, I have Q&A. Have you seen significant use of the NVD community feeds? Yeah, across the board, we've seen significant use, but NVD certainly, and that's one of the things I'll first talk about. So I guess I'll hop in. It seems like we have a good audience. If you want to talk, don't hesitate to just unmute, raise your hand. I'm managing this myself. I allowed everyone to talk, so you should be able to if you want to. And then would love to answer any questions you have. So just drop those in the chat as we go along, and we'll have some pauses where people can talk to. Probably biggest thing for us is, getting feedback and then providing visibility as far as where the product is today with VulnCheck community. I say product, right? Essentially, we're offering a free service to the community, but we manage it like any other product that we have. And I'm Patrick Garrity, security researcher here, and helping manage the community versions of our product. So I think the first thing, a lot of people have come in via different waves of releasing different products. So I just want to bring everyone up to speed as far as a level playing field on what VulnCheck community is. And there's multiple, things to consider here. The first part of VulnCheck community that we launched when we did VulnCheck community is VulnCheck KEV, which is the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog that we're providing. So this is additional known exploitation, a lot of other stuff, which I'll hop into beyond just what solicited KEV is providing. Also provides earlier visibility into vulnerabilities that often land on the KEV. Then we have NVD++, which is a reliable service for the NIST National Vulnerability Database I'll be hopping into, where we're doing the JSON delivery of that reliably, and then we've layered in enrichment, specifically CPE, which I'll hop into today. Hopefully that gets you all excited. And then two other things that we've done historically for a while is VulnCheck XDB, which is our exploit database, and then report a vulnerability. So we're a CNA, so you can submit a vulnerability to us, and we can get a CVE assigned for that vulnerability. So really, as of right now, like for different core services that we're providing to the community. And I put this on a timeline. The thing is things rapidly changed. I joined in late January, right? And when I joined, right, I learned after I decided to join that we're going to launch VulnCheck KEV. And so essentially we had been, for context here, VulnCheck KEV has been around for a few years. It was part of our commercial service, right? So when we're talking about the VulnCheck community, timelines, some of these things are aspects of things that we've delivered on the commercial side and have moved over to provide to the community that we felt were really, really important. So starting with the timeline, report of vulnerability, we became a CNA April 12, 2023. May 25th, 2023, our exploit database of exploits and Git repositories. So that includes things like Gitty, GitHub, and other Git repositories. Then when NVD announced deprecation of NVD 1.1.0, we decided, hey, we're going to allow people to consume that still. So essentially down converting NIST NVD 2 to 1. Excuse me. And then I got to join late January, and the idea came up of like, hey, we're going to launch this thing called VulnCheck KEV, excuse me, which is a community product, and we're going to call it VulnCheck Community. One thing I'd emphasize here too is up until this point, we had no UI. So everything that we're doing predominantly has been delivered via JSON. So if you think of that interesting experience, it was only until recently, and I think this is really, really applicable to the audience here to hear, right? That most of what we're doing is optimized around machine delivery, JSON via API. And so February 27th, when we launched VulnCheck KEV, we decided to build a web interface for that so you could access the VulnCheck KEV known exploited vulnerabilities. Subsequently, during that time, we saw NVD starting to slow down. The reliability of the NVD and trying to use its APIs being rather difficult. And that's over a longer period of time. But, more or less, we were in a position where we felt it would be a good idea to contribute back to the community. So we launched on March 14th, NVD++. So first, the foundation was making sure that we delivered that via API and JSON, like for like with NIST NVD. And then we circled back around March 25th and started enriching with automated CPE generation on March 25th. So that kind of brings us up to speed as far as like now from a timeline perspective. If you think about it, almost launching 3 products in the last 2 months, less than, on the community side, right? So huge commitment to continuing to build and provide these services back to the community, which is, really, really cool to be a part of and see how that makes an impact. I think one of the questions earlier was like how much how significant is the adoption? So I will tell you, pretty significant as far as the amount of people consuming both NVD++ as well as VulnCheck KEV since the launch, which is great to see. And then I think from that perspective, we'll hop in more, and I'll do a deeper dive on some of these things. One of the things I want to highlight from a community perspective and our priorities, number one, like you might go into the UI and be like, oh, there's not information there, or it might not work how you expect. Our first priority is delivering things machine readable, JSON and API. And just want to make sure everyone understands and knows it's like, yes, we're delivering this up to the community so they can operationalize it in their Vuln tools. The community editions as well, they're free to use even on the commercial side with attribution, open source projects as well. Second is delivering reliably and at scale, which is important to us. You have to have a service that you can continue to rely and count on. So that becomes really, really important, and being able to deliver these things fast. I think one funny thing that's come up is like pagination. Hopefully I said that right. On the API side, like most that's limitations of AWS. So we've certainly been adjusting and updating our documentation to make sure people understand, what limits to set when they're using our APIs. So we can deliver at the speed of AWS. Then we have the aspect of timeliness of intelligence. So like there is a lot more we're doing beyond community and the Intel side. This is a portion of this, but these are all things that are really, really important to our customer base as a whole, in addition to the community additions and services. And then last, I just say like user experience, I kind of made a mention of the fact that up until February, we didn't have a UI. Because we're delivering everything via API and machine readable, and that's really what we've been known for. So this is brand new, something to emphasize. So I think like hearing the community's feedback, what things you want to see, how you want things to work. There's certainly, opportunities to improve the user experience too. From a product perspective, and some things come in. So things like search and navigation, and being able to log into a portal, and being able to assess things that way as well. So, I'm gonna hop in a little bit further. Well, I'll stop for a second because before I go, just curious, there are some questions I got in Q&A. So I'm happy to discuss those. And then, curious to pause if anyone has any other comments or wants to talk as well, about how we're doing so far before I hop into the details of NVD++, KEV, and product specific things. No questions. Curious how many CVEs you all have generated so far as a CNA. Well, that's a good question. I think it's in the hundreds. It varies, but a decent continuation of contributing from a CNA perspective to the CVE program. But certainly a balance, like you want the CVEs to be high quality. So I think there's some CVE numbering authorities that are focused on volume over quality. Can you go into more detail on how CPEs are generated? I can try my best as we get into NVD++. Do you have or plan to publish reliability metrics and uptime? That's a good question. So first off, like same architecture as our commercial services, right? So it's designed for, scale in reliability. For our commercial customers, that's certainly a thing. I don't know on the community side, or at what stage we'll publish that stuff. But yeah, certainly on the commercial side, like there are customers that decide to license things for SLA guarantees. Keep that in mind as well. Any more questions? Anybody want to talk? Got a quiet crowd. I'll add some
Hey, this
more
is Tim.
people.
Yeah, sorry, I've been hammering you in the Q&A.
Oh, it's
But
great.
yeah, thanks
It's
for
great.
answering this. And also just a side note, good to see web UI coming. I think that's a helpful tool for troubleshooting in particular.
Yeah, we have the start of it, the foundation of it, but there's opportunity for us to improve. And I'll talk through some of that. Most of the UI is KEV today. We are planning really soon to also have all of NIST NVD available. It is available, my understanding on community in the search. It just doesn't have any like browse functionality. And then there's some things we're fixing right now in regards to search to make it a lot easier. In addition to what we're doing today. So expect some improvements in that area. I think a lot of times people sign up. I've talked to a lot of people, they go in, they sign up for community edition, they hop in, and the first thing they think about is like the user experience, right? Whereas we've been more focused on the machine experience with JSON and API delivery. So certainly an opportunity for us to improve. Thanks, Tim. All right. We'll hop into, I think I answered most of those live. Oh, I love it. Someone asked for the ability to export to XLSX or CSV. That's near and dear to my heart. So, there's a lot of discussion and debate, right? Right now we do JSON and API around that one. So um, yeah, it's nice to have a CSV XLS export. So what is NVD plus plus? So first off, reliable delivery of NIST NVD JSON version 1 and version 2. This allows someone to call our service, get the NIST JSON reliably, not have to continue to make changes necessarily. We're maintaining backwards compatibility today as well. So you can move in your own timelines in regards to new versions, which is pretty cool. And then the other thing is vulnerability enrichment. So VC configurations. These VC configurations, right now we have CP, which is automated CPE generation. So there were some questions as far as how we're doing CPE. And I would say a few things. Number one is there's a lot of information out there in regards to security advisories, then CVE information, the CVE program, so that we can grab the right information so then we can properly generate CPE, and then we unroll that CPE as well. We predominantly focused initially on like the most common vendors. So I think I have a screenshot here in a second, which breaks down some of the different coverage. So ones like Microsoft, Oracle, Adobe. I don't know, we could go on and on. Maybe it's on the next slide. But making sure that's high quality. And I think the other thing is feedback cycle. Anyone can email community at any time. But some of our partners and customers too are providing feedback on the quality. And a lot of them said in many cases, our CPA is outperforming NIST NVD in certain instances. And then, there's certain areas for opportunity too, where we get feedback and we adjust or modify how we're generating the CPE accordingly. But our focus is on automation and making sure that's high quality. And then there's some opportunity to expand additional enrichment with CWE. We haven't really focused or talked about CVSS. Most of that's provided by the underlying suppliers. So like the CNAs typically are entering that information. NVD was doing mostly additional analysis. So haven't had a focus on that today. But just sharing, where we're at in the CPE, continuing to expand that. And then, there's some opportunities for CWE enrichment and gaps between NIST NVD as well. So hopefully that's helpful. I would say one of the other areas when we're talking about the NVD gap, and that's part of our core service, is like references and broader information. So I think, something to recognize, like we're not planning on putting that in the community service. That's in our commercial service today, to highlight. In our commercial service, like that's correlating hundreds and hundreds of feeds to provide a bunch of more broader enrichment. So I think twofold here. I want to take a moment to pause to hop into like NVD, just to show, some of the aspects of how it works with the API, with the community edition. I do have a few examples of generation. So this was taken, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago. But this is a comparison of us generating in CPE compared to the NVD generation. NVD's been pretty much a lost cause at this point. I don't know what to say. Kind of surprised lack of communication side, but it is what it is. But in comparison, consistently generating CPE automatically as new CVEs are getting issued, which is great and aligned with our intention. This is a CPE generation chart, and I don't know. I can zoom in on it, right? So the green is where we have CPE coverage, and I think this is about a week old. Purple is where we don't. What you're going to see, from a green coverage is the usual suspects. So Linux, Microsoft, Adobe, Apple, Apache, Oracle, we can kind of go on and on. And then as we get lower, WordPress ecosystem with WordFence, lower coverage patch stack. A lot of this is dependent on what information is being supplied by CNA that we can generate off of, and then security advisories. So an example area like MITRE CNA, which is a catch-all, becomes a lot harder to build any meaningful CPE generation or automation off of. So, that's an area where NVD was providing, a lot of value if you look at it from that perspective. So, all right, I'm going to stop my screen. It's good dialogue. Is this helpful? Going in the right direction? All right. So we're going to hop over here. And what I want to highlight is a few different things. So NVD ++. First off, you can search CVEs. So we could type a CVE in here. We're going to improve this search, but you have to capitalize the CVE. And you can look up any CVE, and that's going to return back. The one thing we're going to add back in is a browse functionality. So similar to VulnCheck KEV, which you have browse here, we'll add a CVE browse. So you can browse CVEs in the UI side. But typically where, we're optimized for what I mentioned, API and JSON delivery, we have this API sandbox. And you can see here, if I look at the indexes, there's NIST NVD, which is NVD1, NVD2, and then VulnCheck KEV. If I click on 2, I can, look at example JSON, but there's a download button. So I can either hit this download button and it would download the full version of the NIST NVD2. I could query the index itself, which I'll show in a moment via browser, via API. And then I could also use the API to get a backup that I could download. So if you want to grab the whole file from an automated perspective, you can. If I click on the index, I'll copy the index API. I'll hop over here. And I'm just going to paste that in here. And then afterwards, $CVE. And you can see I get a direct response for this CVE delivered via JSON. So a lot of times when I'm doing my work today, I'm typically just, typing in the API key when I'm logged in, and we can see the information here, CPE information, the VC configurations, as I mentioned and talked about as well. And then on the doc side, and then I was going to show you the backup as well. So the backup, if you want to access the backup, we would just change index to backup. And this gives the link to be able to download whole NIST NVD 2 with the VC configurations, which is the CPE information that I mentioned a moment ago. If I hop over to docs, and I know I'm totally getting in the weeds here, but there is good documentation in regards to the delivery of these, how do they access Curl, Go, and Python examples. And then we have the VulnCheck CPE schema available as well. One of the common questions I would say that we get, or we've been getting, is how we expect people to consume the CPE. And I think naturally, like, the quality of our CPE is improving every day. It's getting broader coverage, but for the most part, currently we're like, well, you probably should default to the NIST CPE when it's available, and then use ours secondarily. But we are seeing some people that are like starting to identify like, hey, the CPE in some areas is better than NIST NVD. So for right now, we're kind of we're not super prescriptive. You can choose how you want to leverage our CPE versus NIST NVD. But generally speaking, our advice is default to NIST NVD CPE, and then use ours where gaps are present. I do think that as we continue to expand and grow our CPE, like, we could be a primary source that's higher quality. And I think, it's kind of curious to see if we even, if and when we even see the NVD return back to some meaningful capacity. in that regard too. So, all right. We got some questions, I think, as I was hopping around. Shall I create a Power BI template for NVD++? We would love that. I know that Balint, a good friend of mine, did some stuff in Power BI. I think there's more room for templates. And then if you do have a project where you're integrating with VulnCheck via KEV or NVD++, and you post it in like a repo or online, like we're happy to link back to that. I'll talk about that in a moment. So, is the backup data updated as often as the index? Ooh, that's a good question. The indexes are updated really, really fast. I think the backups are, it might be like 4, 8, or 12 hours. So I think there's a little bit more of a delay on the backup side. I can give you a full answer on that, Tim, to make sure it's accurate. But yeah, that's a good observation. All right, so VulnCheck KEV, I think, is going to be next. I guess any questions about NVD++ before I hop into VulnCheck KEV? Nope. All right, cool. So upcoming improvements on NVD++, expanded CPE generation, NVD Explorer. So being able to access the, this is weird. It is what it is. Being able to access the CVE information and then search improvements are coming. So I think we had good dialogue. If you guys have any other questions on NVD++, like happy to answer them. Don't hesitate to throw them in the chat or the Q&A. Q&A is harder managing a few different screens. So cool. VulnCheck KEV, so known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. A few different things here. So this is an extension. Well, I shouldn't say extension, but like this is inclusive of SysAKEV. Just to highlight, and there's some significant differences. Number one, much broader from a CVE perspective. There's more than double the number of CVEs that we have identified. Every single one of them we're providing evidence for. So currently, since we launched, we're now up to 2,260 known exploited vulnerabilities. Every single one of them has reference citations. We now have 9,100 unique reference citations, and that's after deduplicating shadow server instances. And then there's 3,750 exploit POC references, which come from XDB. I will highlight, like, that's not all of our exploit references. That's Git repository exploit references in our commercial product. There's much broader evidence of exploit POCs. It's available, same thing, vulncheck.com/community. And I showed you a moment ago as far as like same way to access it via API as NIST NVD. It's free to use with attribution for both open source and commercial products. This is a really quick overview of like new evidence of known exploitation in the current year that we've added since we launched. So you can see, some interesting products: Microsoft, Apple, Linux, usual suspects, D-Link, Fortinet, Avanti, Adobe. And then on the right-hand side, we start getting into like, individual vulnerabilities by company. So Progress Camp, Crush FTP, Citrix, and others as well. The other thing to highlight, this just separates out between like the blue being SysAKEV and then the red being other known vulnerabilities that we identify as known and exploited. And there's evidence for all of those as well. So big part of this is ensuring that like we're providing evidence behind the exploitation. And all of that is publicly referenceable as well. So if you have a question as far as where the evidence came from, and want to get more information, you can get quick access to that too. Historical evidence. Historical evidence, I called it. So one thing we have done as well, in addition to adding newer exploitation, is I've spent a lot of time on historical exploitation. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, I think a year ago even, I was collecting evidence of exploitation. And then I spend a lot of time looking at different security advisories. So, obviously there was an opportunity to improve our historical coverage. And this is particularly important, especially for larger organizations that have been around for a long time and things like manufacturing and finance. So, I think we've added a few hundred known exploited vulnerabilities historically. Some of the things I observed that you might find interesting is like MSRC, Microsoft's delivery of vulnerability information. It only goes back until like 2016. But their security advisories they had been publishing told you whether things were exploited in the wild. So there's just a lot of different interesting areas to find known exploitation, confirmed exploitation, as well. So just want to share that because that's an important thing to understand or know from a known exploitation perspective. And then ransomware usage. So in addition to solicited KEV's ransomware notes, we also enrich to tell you whether we're aware of ransomware being associated with vulnerability. So that's what this looks like from a distribution perspective. I don't know how much I want to hop into this, but time to KEV, this is an interesting metric to look at. So we have the date added. The date added field within KEV is essentially the date in which the publication reported known exploitation. Few observations is that in 2023, 25% of vulnerabilities had known exploitation at or before the time of a CVE being published. So that tells us, you have to be able to act quick, respond fast. I'll publish research on this soon. I haven't actually showed or talked about this yet, but I thought that's like an interesting observation from the data set. And another question is like, from a difference perspective, what's different between solicited KEV and VulnCheck KEV as far as what we've seen known exploit that's not on solicited KEV. So we can see here pretty broadly across the technology stacks and even other technologies too. There's evidence of exploitation that just isn't captured for one reason or another. For between us and CISA. And one thing I'd say is CISA did have a great talk at VulnCon helping explain and understand this is they're making decisions based on cost to the federal government on fixing a known exploited vulnerability. So every time they put a KEV on the or solicited KEV, right, there's a huge cost to the federal government. So they're not so focused on capturing every known exploited vulnerability. They're more focused on which ones will make the highest impact to be remediated from a government perspective. So, all right. Other interesting observations. So I took 2 years of VulnCheck KEV date added. And being new, right? I'm like, why are there these big giant lumps? So if you see here, there's kind of a baseline as far as number of exploited vulnerabilities that have been added, 25 to 35 a month roughly, and that's a gradual increasing line. But we have these 2 breakouts. The one on the left is when solicited KEV dumped a list of vulnerabilities over 2 months, March and April of 2022. And then we see Shadow Server we added as a source in November, and this was before launch, right? And so naturally, as evidence came in from Shadow Server, we added that. So it was a slow flow, and then it dropped back to a normal baseline. So, just kind of highlighting some of the aspects of how VulnCheck KEV works. When there's possible spikes as well, but generally speaking, I think you can rely on exploitation and continue to gradually increase at a pretty similar rate, unless there's other sources that we're adding of known exploitation that are more pervasive. But ideally, even if it's historical, like trying to slide that in slowly, into the feed itself. So upcoming improvements, you're going to see more KEVs all the time. We're continuing to work on that, expanding historical evidence. Product name normalization. So we already did vendor name normalization, but we're going to do product name normalization on KEV as well. This is useful for data visualizations, for analysis, for a bunch of different things. And then continuing to help improve speed as far as time to new KEVs being accessible and seen. So I think that's it for VulnCheck KEV. Happy to answer. It looks like there's maybe some questions. That was Balin asking about that. That's funny. Power BI for KEV. We actually, I think, did also in our documentation add in the integration section how to integrate with Power BI or JSON. So, all right, the historical analysis is interesting. Will this report be shared? Yeah, we're considering doing a state of exploits report. It'll probably come out in the next month or two, where we'll share more of these findings. Or maybe I was thinking about today even converting some of this discussion into a blog post as well, to provide meaningful insights to the community. So super helpful. You should implement a chatbot that allows users to talk to NVD++ and reassure users that vulnerabilities will not be exploited, that everything will be fine. Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny. Like, I'm not laughing here because use of AI. Everyone's always like, "Yeah, make a chatbot. Then you can say you have AI, and then it's useless." But yeah, certainly that's a funny one. Hey, what's up, Steven? Good to see you. Hop on. Any other questions? Like, I'm happy to answer anything as it relates to exploitation in SysKev, VulnCheck KEV, non-exploited vulnerabilities. I spend a lot of time doing analysis in this area. And then I think the other thing is like, yeah, I'm interested to hear from y'all, what types of improvements you would like to see from a VulnCheck community perspective. Anyone want to talk? Or chat?
I'll ask a question. I really liked the dashboard, but you went through it pretty quickly. I was curious what you had on the, like what determined what you wanted to put on the dashboard. I also really liked your search. I'm a designer, so I'm curious about these kind of things.
Yeah. Well, we can talk through it. You're talking about the dashboard here, correct? Yeah, so a few things, and good feedback. I'm glad to hear that. I think our design team will love it. So usability, right, is one of the aspects. So today, really, you can only click on VulnCheck KEV to browse. So we're going to add the capabilities so you can also access the NIST NVD CVEs, similar to what you can do with VulnCheck KEV. Other search improvements, like if I go in here today and if I don't capitalize, for instance, CVE, it's not going, wait, now it's going to prove me wrong because we're about to release this, but it's not going to recognize this and the search will come back and tell you the CVE doesn't exist. So that's another example of like a user improvement. But yeah, I think the question more or less is there anything that you guys would like to see from an improvement perspective? And then I think the other aspect is just getting people to the place that are comfortable. And I think it depends who the people are and understanding, hey, here's how you would download access. So you're going to see some improvements where there's a download button, for instance, when you browse. Link to APIs to make it a little bit more intuitive and usable from an accessibility standpoint. So, and then if I click on, I probably should click on one of these. So XDB, there's going to be ones in here too, like the Palo Alto one, right? So once you actually get to the CVE, we have the layout of information. So even feedback on this, from a usability standpoint, is super helpful or useful. And then the other thing I would say improvement wise is like we have the XDB link here, but this isn't actually in the dashboard. When you click more, it opens up a public web page. So like getting that into the community edition as well is going to be useful or helpful. So does that answer what you were looking to see?
Yeah, that's really exciting to see. Thanks so much for going into more depth on that.
Hey, what else would you like to see in here? Is there anything on your mind or other people's mind? Okay, we got one. Please replace CPEs with more reliable identifiers. Sorry, that's funny. Feedback for that UI. I can't see the CPEs without hovering over them. So let's see an example here. This is great. We can, we get to do. What do you mean by hover? Oh, that's kind of interesting. Like the CPE click through, we intentionally try not to prompt people for our paid version. So a lot of times these experiences are just the fact that this is a newer UI. Oh, I get what you're saying. You can't see the full CPE string in the UI. So that's actually a really good type of feedback from a UI perspective. So all right, now the feedback's coming. Now that I'm you're like, oh, he's actually serious. He does want feedback. Yeah, that I get it. Like I have to click this to actually see the CPE. The CPE actually wasn't even populating from our JSON until a few days, I don't know, a week ago or a few days ago. So yeah, that's super interesting, likely easy types of fix. XLXS button export or CSV. Maybe a top 20 recent CVEs under active exploitation. So actually this this list here is the last 3 added, and when you click more, it's the last. And when I say added, it's the date in which it was reported by the publication. So there might be a little bit of confusion, but like this is your top list. I think it would be interesting to get the product and the vendor information either here or do a top list. I was also thinking that it would be nice to see like a last 90 days top list. So what are the top 5 vendors and products? The challenge with that is like top 5 is always Microsoft. Part of that is not because they're a bad product, but like they're one of the companies that consistently discloses exploitation. So there's a lot of misnomers there. Maybe a top 20. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I like the top 20 ideas. That's something that is on my list. You can't see full CPE. Awesome. Thank you for that feedback, Kyle. CPE would look better as a list instead of tiles and match them. Ooh, yes. Yeah, we're getting great design feedback here, by the way.
Yeah, being able to search within those tiles. I actually liked the tiles. It's interesting to see that feedback, but being able to search within that tile list would be good too, rather than having to go to the separate search.
Yeah. Also, we're going to make improvements so that like you can select how many you want to see per page. 228 pages, right? And you only see two per page. Can take a while to sort through. But yeah, if we go back, everyone's excited about the CPE stuff, right? Wait, so you said you like the tiles?
I do, but I
just want
only
the list.
Yeah, only if you had the ability to hover over it. And like the customer said, you can't see the whole thing. So it is more cognitive burden because they have to hover over it, and then there's no way to like easily copy and paste it.
Well, the other thing I realized is when you click on this is a click through, and the click through is a search functionality in our paid edition, which is why it's going to this avenue. And like our intention is not to try and upsell community members. Like the ones that want our commercial products come over. And so there's a balance with that. in that, like, initially, I think when people first came in, we had these more gates, and the intention wasn't a gate. It was like, we just need to separate our commercial product from the community edition. You know, so you just keep that in mind. But this is actually really helpful that, like, this is an improvement we can make, and this is something we just added recently. And then I think the practitioner side of this is Balin just wants to copy and paste the list, so he can actually use that in a different tool to probably look up all his asset inventory stuff, which you were talking about, I think on LinkedIn, you know, in some of your different tools. So that makes complete sense as well. Like, you wouldn't want to have to copy and paste. Now, the nice thing is I can, you know, I can just copy this and I could go directly to the if I do a quick pivot, I can go to the NIST NVD2 index. Oh, actually, I think there might be a ability to, yeah, I can actually click here and it goes straight to the API. This is what happens when you have a new UI, is like, you don't know any nuance, but like from here, I can just click on here and pivot directly to the CPE information. And it's going to provide it all in the machine readable format that Balin, you just mentioned you want to see. So, all right, we're hopping around. Hopefully that was helpful for someone. I should know the details of nuances. So, other feedback, I guess, your APIs are great and loving the full backup API too. Good stuff. Grouping CPE by vendor and product would be wonderful. Yeah, vendor and product get interesting too. So it's easier to do with KEV because everything has a defined product and vendor. When we start getting into the broader CVE landscape, it gets a bit more complicated. But likely some of the stuff we're going to work on, and then there are some things on the commercial product side that help solve for that if you're a customer, for context as well. So, any other? I'll look over at Q&A. I often receive inquiries from clients about significant CVEs featured in headlines and their potential impact. Many of these questions seem to stem from a basic misunderstanding of client-server relationships and the distinction between public-facing and non-public-facing component. I agree with you 100%. Is there a way to quickly and effectively communicate the relevance of a CVE to a client-specific environment, particularly focusing on key resources and critical infrastructure? So yes, and this is always a balance, right? So it's like, we have some of those categorizations. So something we call initial access is usually how we identify or say something is internet facing. And so certainly internet facing components or devices are going to be much more critical to run after when we're looking at things like known exploitation or vulnerabilities. So yeah, I think that's a great question. One thing I would say is, and then there's an aspect of you know, the markings as well. So if I look at, for instance, you're going to see some of this, but like initial access intelligence, like if you see this green sticker, that's you know, that's on a commercial product side. So I would just say that emphasizes like there's a lot more interest in that vulnerability. And then the XDB entries on the exploit side, that doesn't answer your specific question, but hopefully provide some guidance as far as like interesting things to use. What other questions? Yeah, so, I mean, someone asked about using APIs from other sources. We have to be mindful when we're talking about commercial sources and what we can or can't provide beyond our own. So we're super mindful of that, but good question. I'm not gonna dive into that one specifically. I use it to do a lot of VLOOKUP and prioritization exercises. Great. How does VulnCheck KEV differ from solicited KEV with respect to affected products? Well, yeah, I think like we don't necessarily factor in with VulnCheck KEV how much product impact there is. So we're not making a decision as far as like, is this pervasive in enterprises or in small businesses or large businesses? We're just analyzing, is there known exploitation with a CVE? And then we're providing the reference. So like a few examples, like we can hop in here and see like, okay, let's see how I might do analysis of a VulnCheck KEV. This Microsoft Windows print spooler, which I found is interesting because Microsoft made a blog post about it, but it wasn't in the MSRC disclosures. So if you look up this CVE as of yesterday, it wasn't marked as exploited by Microsoft. And then a day later, this showed up on SysACEV, right? So we're providing this evidence so that you can also make some of these conclusions or decisions. But generally speaking, like any evidence of exploitation is a decent signal to say, I probably want to take action and do something about this. We can look at some other ones. Here's a SQL injection. Something associated with PHP. Wouldn't be surprised if it's a WordPress plugin and that it says plugin. And this was discovered via shadow server, right? You know, so we see the evidence. I could click here, probably low amount, but we can see the source was China. You know, how seriously you want to take that from an exploitation evidence perspective. Like we're leaving that to you to make a determination. From our perspective, if you have something internet facing that has some evidence of exploitation, it's probably a good thing to fix relatively quickly. And then, you know, here's another example. This is one that's not on SysACEV. And I theorize why. Open metadata is pretty widely used open source project. And SysACEV hasn't put on the KEV. They might. But my assumption is the federal government might not be using this, you know, or it's not involved much in critical infrastructure. So they care about a bit less. But this was actually on a blog post, you know, regarding Kubernetes clusters. So there's a lot of, I try and rationalize when I look at evidence of exploitation. Oh, and, you know, by the way, there's like, you know, a bunch of CVEs associated with this. So also we found like sometimes that SysACEV will capture one CVE, but not other CVEs associated with similar vulnerabilities. I bet if I, you know, look at Palo Alto Networks, for instance, there's probably a ton of evidence here. Yeah, Shadow Server also popped up, Palo Alto Networks, you know, just different places, CISA. And then we can look at timelines. So what I find interesting is if I go to VulnCheck KEV, this Palo Alto one, we have some XDB links, but I also can see the time of reported exploitation and map a timeline out. So I use this sometimes in my visualizations, but specifically what I see a lot of people doing is the date added, they can actually understand how long a vulnerability has been exploited for. If you calculate on that number based on known exploitation, right? So, you know, hopefully that's helpful. We're going in more of deep dive here, which is fun. This is the type of stuff that I geek out about and enjoy every day as well. So. All right, that was a good feedback session. Anything else? I think I have a few other there's a few other things I want to highlight, which are community projects. And please feel free to ask more questions if you have them. I'm happy to stay on as long as y'all want. But the last thing that I had prepared is I did just want to highlight, if you go to our docs, genuinely the community products, VulnCheck KEV, NVD++, XDB, you know, with attribution are available so you can leverage and use them. There's a handful of different projects that you can see that are already adopting and using VulnCheck KEV as well as VulnCheck NVD++. And then commercial products as well. So, I mean, nice thing is, you know, we just ask for prominent attribution when you're displaying the information with that. And that's, you know, a lot of our intentions too, is to help provide good high fidelity intelligence and value to the community as a whole, and making vulnerability intelligence more accessible. So I think that's all I have. I have an example, but yeah, more or less, like, happy to open it up if you guys have more questions, you want to geek out or hop into any of the VulnCheck stuff. Happy to, spend some more time. It's up to you guys, you people that are still here. I see some friendly faces. Scott Moore had the exact Nodus deck back in the 80s. Yeah, these are reissues. And then actually, right now I skate a Nodus deck, which is pretty cool. The Panther. All right. Hey, if there's no other, is there any other feedback you guys have? Questions? I got to go into awkward silence mode to get you to talk. Good session. Thanks. Cool. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to end. I appreciate everyone hopping in to chat a little bit. As always, like, for me, first off, like, you can access VulnCheck community. Just go vulncheck.com/community, and you can sign up with just an email address. If you have any feedback, like, please email us, community@vulncheck.com. Happy to continue to reiterate, make the product better for everyone from a community standpoint. And then, yeah, keep an eye out on LinkedIn, always posting new content. And then Tim said community Slack channel. Yeah, Tim, I'm going to reach out to you because I want some advice on that. Like, we're definitely open to building more of a community beyond just, having a conversation. I think the question is how we maintain that and make sure that there's value add to everyone there. And I think we moved so quick with the product launches, right, that I was a little bit hesitant to just like spin up a bunch more work. So I've heard that from multiple people. I think it's a great idea. So I'll circle back on that one in regards to, do we open up some sort of community Slack or place for open discussion? So cool. Thanks so much, everyone, today. Appreciate the time. And as always, like, I love sharing some of my data visualizations and what we're working on from a product perspective. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about VulnCheck in general. So